Xander Montgomery stared at the pregnancy test lying on the marble bathroom counter, watching the single line appear through the small window, and felt his chest tighten with a disappointment he had never imagined would cut so deep. Elena Chen stood beside him, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the test, confirming what they both already knew. Another negative. That made 6 months of trying, 6 months of hope building and crashing in 2-week cycles, 6 months of pretending the failure did not sting quite as much as it did. "It's okay," Elena whispered, though her voice wavered. She set the test down with careful precision, as if handling it gently might somehow change the result. "We knew it might take time." Xander pulled her into his arms, pressing his lips against her temple. At 32, he had built a real estate empire that stretched across the West Coast, closed deals worth hundreds of millions, and negotiated with some of the toughest businessmen in the industry. None of that had prepared him for the peculiar helplessness of wanting to give his wife something he could not simply buy or strategize into existence. They had met 2 years ago at a charity gala, where Elena had been working as an event coordinator. She had been directing staff with quiet efficiency, her dark hair swept into a neat bun, wearing a simple black dress that somehow stood out in a sea of designer gowns. When the centerpiece at the head table had started to topple, she had caught it with reflexes that made him laugh out loud, drawing her attention for the first time. "Nice save," he had said, approaching her with a glass of champagne in hand. "Part of the job description," she had replied, flashing him a smile that made something in his chest flip. "Crisis management is my specialty. I could use someone with that skill set in my life. Are you prone to falling centerpieces, Mr. Montgomery, Xander Montgomery?" He had extended his hand, noticing the way her eyes widened slightly in recognition. His name carried weight in certain circles, but she had not fawned or flirted the way many women did when they learned about his net worth. "The real estate developer," she had said, shaking his hand with a firm grip. "Your company just broke ground on that new mixed-use development downtown. You follow commercial real estate. I follow everything that affects this city. Good event planning means understanding your audience and your context." She had glanced past him then, her attention caught by something across the room. "If you'll excuse me, I need to make sure the auction paddles are distributed before the bidding starts." He had watched her navigate through the crowd with purpose, and made a mental note to find out everything he could about Elena Chen. By the end of the night, he had convinced her to have coffee with him the following week. By the end of the month, he was certain she was unlike anyone he had ever met. By the end of 6 months, he had proposed with a ring that cost more than most people earned in a year, on a beach in Malibu at sunset. Because despite his wealth and success, he was not above a grand romantic gesture when it mattered. She had said yes without hesitation, her eyes filling with tears as she threw her arms around his neck. And they had gotten married 4 months later, in a ceremony that blended his preference for elegance with her desire for intimacy. 75 guests, a string quartet, vows they had written themselves that made even his stoic father tear up. The plan had always been to start a family relatively quickly. Elena was 28, healthy, and they were both eager to fill the 6-bedroom house Xander had bought in the hills with the sound of children's laughter. They had assumed it would be easy, the way people always do before they encounter infertility. But now, standing in their gleaming bathroom with its heated floors and rainfall shower, holding his wife while she fought back tears, Xander felt the first real tendrils of fear creeping in. What if it never happened? What if this was one problem his money and determination could not solve? "Maybe we should see a doctor," Elena said softly, pulling back to look up at him. Her brown eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her jaw was set with the same determination he had always admired. Just to make sure everything is working the way it should be. Whatever you want, Xander agreed, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. I'll call the best fertility specialist in the state tomorrow. Elena managed a small smile. Of course you will. I love you, he said, needing her to hear it to know that this changed nothing about how he felt. I love you too. She kissed him gently, then stepped out of his embrace. I need to finish getting ready for work. The Sanderson wedding is this weekend, and the bride is threatening to change the entire color scheme 3 days out. You're still going in today. Work doesn't stop because I'm disappointed, Xander. Besides, staying busy helps. She moved to the closet, pulling out a burgundy dress that complemented her skin tone beautifully. What about you? Big day of making millions. He heard the gentle teasing in her tone and felt grateful for it. Elena never let him take himself too seriously. Never treated him like he was fragile or untouchable the way some people did when they learned about his wealth. She had grown up solidly middle class, the daughter of immigrants who owned a successful restaurant in Chinatown, and she had worked for everything she had achieved. It was one of the many reasons he respected her so deeply. Just a few million, he replied, matching her light tone. I'm taking it easy today. She laughed, the sound easing some of the tension in his shoulders. They would get through this. They had to. The fertility specialist, Dr. Rachel Morrison, had an office in a sleek medical building in Santa Monica, with views of the ocean and a waiting room that looked more like a high-end hotel lobby. Xander appreciated the discretion, the way the staff spoke in hushed tones, and ushered them into a private consultation room within minutes of their arrival. Dr. Morrison was a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and a direct manner that Xander found reassuring. She listened to their story without interrupting, making notes on her tablet, and then began explaining the various tests they would need to run. 6 months of trying is actually within the normal range, she said, her voice calm and professional. But given that you're both eager to move forward and you're willing to pursue testing, I think that's a reasonable approach. We'll do a full workup for both of you. Blood work, hormone levels, a semen analysis for you, Xander, and an ultrasound and HSG for Elena to check that your fallopian tubes are clear. Elena nodded, her hand finding Xander's and squeezing tightly. He squeezed back, grateful for the anchor of her touch. How long will all of this take? Xander asked. Most of the tests can be done within the next couple of weeks. We should have a clearer picture of what we're working with by the end of the month. Dr. Morrison smiled at them both. Try not to worry too much. The vast majority of couples we see go on to have successful pregnancies, whether naturally or with assistance. We have many options available. The testing process was more invasive and emotionally draining than Xander had anticipated. He had never been particularly squeamish, but there was something uniquely uncomfortable about producing a sample in a sterile medical room, knowing it would be analyzed and judged. Elena's tests were worse, requiring procedures that left her cramping and uncomfortable, though she bore it all with characteristic grace. They got the results on a Tuesday afternoon, both of them sitting in Dr. Morrison's office, holding hands so tightly Xander thought his fingers might bruise. The good news is that all of your tests came back normal, Dr. Morrison said, and Xander felt Elena sag with relief beside him. Elena, your hormones are excellent, your tubes are clear, and your ovarian reserve is very healthy. Xander, your sperm count and motility are well above average. From a medical standpoint, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to conceive naturally. Then why hasn't it happened? Elena asked, her voice small. Sometimes there's no clear answer. We call it unexplained infertility, and it's actually more common than you might think. The good news is that couples with unexplained infertility often respond very well to fertility treatments. Dr. Morrison leaned forward, her expression encouraging. I'd like to start you on Clomid, Elena. It's a medication that stimulates ovulation, increases your chances of releasing multiple eggs each cycle. We'll monitor you with ultrasounds to track your response and time intercourse for when you're most fertile. And if that doesn't work, Xander asked, then we have other options. Intrauterine insemination, if. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Many couples succeed with just a few rounds of Clomid. Elena started the medication that cycle, taking a small white pill each night before bed. Xander watched her swallow it, watched the hope bloom in her eyes each time, and prayed to a God he was not sure he believed in that this would work. The first medicated cycle ended with Elena crying in the bathroom, and Xander holding her on the floor while she sobbed against his chest. The second cycle, she made it to the bedroom before breaking down. The third cycle, she did not cry at all, just set the negative test on the counter and walked away with a blank expression that scared him more than the tears had. Maybe we should take a break, Xander suggested that night as they lay in bed, the space between them feeling wider than it should. This is taking a toll on you, Elena, on both of us. I don't want to take a break, Elena said, staring up at the ceiling. Every month we wait is another month we're not pregnant. I'm 29, Xander. We want multiple children. We don't have time to take breaks. You're 29, not 39. We have time. Do we? She turned to look at him, her eyes fierce in the dim light. Because it feels like we don't. It feels like every month that passes is another failure, another thing I can't give you. Elena. He rolled onto his side, cupping her face with his hand. You don't owe me a baby. This isn't about what you can or can't give me. We're in this together. Are we? Because you seem fine and I feel like I'm falling apart. The words hit him harder than he expected. I'm not fine. I'm just trying to stay strong for you. I don't need you to be strong. I need you to be honest. Her voice cracked, and he saw the tears she had been holding back finally spill over. I need you to tell me if you're as scared as I am. I'm terrified, he admitted, the confession freeing something in his chest. I'm terrified that this might never happen. I'm terrified of watching you hurt every month. I'm terrified that wanting this so badly might somehow make it harder to get. Elena reached for him, and they held each other in the darkness, both of them crying for the first time since this journey had begun. Something shifted between them that night, a breaking down of the brave faces they had been wearing, a return to the raw honesty that had always defined their relationship. Dr. Morrison recommended moving to IUI after the third failed Clomid cycle. The procedure was simple enough in theory. Elena would take medication to stimulate her ovaries. They would monitor her response with ultrasounds and blood work. And when she was ready to ovulate, Xander would provide a sample that would be washed and concentrated before being inserted directly into Elena's uterus through a thin catheter. It improves the odds, Dr. Morrison explained. We're giving the sperm a head start, making sure they're in the right place at the right time. The first IUI was strange and clinical. Xander sat in the waiting room while Elena was in the procedure room, her feet in stirrups, and he found himself wondering how something so medical could result in something as miraculous as a child. When the nurse called him back, Elena was lying on the exam table with her hips elevated on a pillow, and she reached for his hand immediately. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Weird, hopeful, terrified." She laughed shakily. "All of the above." They went home and spent the rest of the day on the couch, watching movies and pretending they were not counting down the 2 weeks until they could test. When the test was negative, they cried together again, but this time there was something less desperate about it, a shared grief that felt more manageable than the isolated pain they had been carrying alone. The second IUI failed. The third one did too. Doctor. Morrison sat them down after the third failure and suggested moving to IVF. Your response to the medication has been excellent, she said, looking at Elena's chart. You're producing multiple mature follicles. Your lining looks great. But for whatever reason, fertilization isn't happening, or if it is, implantation isn't occurring. With IVF, we can control more of the variables. We retrieve your eggs, fertilize them with Xander's sperm in the lab, and transfer the embryos when they've developed for a few days. We can also do genetic testing to make sure we're transferring healthy embryos. What are the success rates? Xander asked. For someone Elena's age with her ovarian reserve, I'd say about 60 to 70% per transfer. Higher if we do genetic testing. Elena looked at Xander, her expression uncertain. It's a bigger step, more invasive, more expensive. I don't care about the money, Xander said immediately. If this is what we need to do, then we do it. It's not just the money, it's hormones, injections, egg retrieval surgery, it's a lot. I know, but if you're willing to do it, I'm with you every step of the way. Elena took a deep breath and turned back to Dr. Morrison. Okay, let's do IVF. The next 2 weeks were a crash course in injectable medications. Elena had to give herself shots in the stomach twice a day, mixing medications with careful precision, sterilizing injection sites, pushing needles through her skin with a wince that made Xander's stomach turn. He offered to do it for her, but she refused, insisting she needed to maintain some sense of control over the process. He went with her to every monitoring appointment, sitting in the ultrasound room while Dr. Morrison counted follicles on the screen and measured them, adjusting medication dosages based on Elena's response. He watched his wife transform over those 2 weeks, her body swelling with the medications, her mood swinging from hopeful to irritable to tearful and back again. I feel like a science experiment, she said one night, lying on the couch with a heating pad on her abdomen. The hormones made her ovaries swell, leaving her bloated and uncomfortable. Like my body isn't even mine anymore. Xander sat beside her, running his fingers through her hair. You're the strongest person I know. I don't feel strong. I feel broken. You're not broken, Elena. Your body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Look at how many follicles you have. Dr. Morrison said your response is incredible. And what if we get the eggs and none of them fertilize? Or they fertilize but don't develop? Or they develop but the transfer doesn't work? Her voice rose with each question, panic threading through the words. What if we go through all of this for nothing? Then we figure out the next step, Xander said firmly. But we can't live in the what-ifs, Elena. We have to take this one day at a time. She looked at him with exhausted eyes. When did you become so wise? I've always been wise. You were just too busy being competent and beautiful to notice. She laughed despite herself, the sound watery but genuine. I love you, you know that. I know. I love you too. The egg retrieval was scheduled for a Friday morning. Elena had to be at the clinic at 6, fasting and nervous. Xander held her hand in the pre-op area while the nurses prepped her Roman 4 and kissed her forehead before they wheeled her back to the procedure room. I'll be right here when you wake up, he promised. The 30 minutes she was gone felt like hours. Xander paced the waiting room, checking his phone compulsively, even though he knew no one would call. When the nurse finally came to get him, leading him to the recovery area where Elena was slowly waking up from anesthesia, he felt like he could breathe again. Hey, he said softly, taking her hand. How are you feeling? Crampy, she mumbled, her words slightly slurred. But okay, did they tell you how many? Not yet. Dr. Morrison said she'd come talk to us. When the doctor appeared a few minutes later, she was smiling. We got 18 eggs. That's an excellent number, Elena. We'll fertilize them today with ICSI, which means we inject a single sperm directly into each mature egg, and then we'll see how many develop over the next 5 or 6 days. 18, Elena repeated, her eyes welling up. That's good. That's very good. Now you need to rest, drink lots of fluids, and take it easy for the next few days. We'll call you tomorrow with the fertilization report. The call came at 9 the next morning. 14 eggs had been mature enough to fertilize, and 12 had successfully fertilized. 12 potential babies, Xander thought, the number almost incomprehensible. They would call again on day 3 and day 5 with updates on how the embryos were developing. The waiting was excruciating. Elena spent the weekend on the couch, recovering from the retrieval, while Xander hovered, bringing her water and snacks and pain medication. They did not talk much, both of them lost in their own thoughts, wondering how many of those 12 embryos would make it to the finish line. Day 3 brought news that 10 embryos were still growing, all of them looking good. Day 5 brought the final count. 7 embryos had developed to the blastocyst stage and were being biopsied for genetic testing. The results would take about a week. 7 is good, Elena said that night, her hand resting on Xander's chest as they lay in bed. Right, 7 is great, Xander agreed, though he had no idea what the normal numbers were. That's 7 chances. I'm trying not to get my hopes up, but I can't help it. I keep imagining what it would feel like to finally see a positive test, to see a heartbeat on an ultrasound, to tell our families we're pregnant. We will, Xander said, with more confidence than he felt. One way or another, we're going to have a baby. The genetic testing results came back with good news. 5 of the 7 embryos were genetically normal. 3 girls and 2 boys. They could choose which one to transfer, or transfer more than one if they wanted to increase their odds. I think we should transfer one, Elena said during their consultation with Dr. Morrison. I know transferring 2 would increase our chances, but it also increases the risk of twins, and I think I want to focus on giving one embryo the best chance rather than dividing my body's resources. I agree, Xander said. Let's give one our full attention. Any preference on gender? Dr. Morrison asked. Elena looked at Xander and they both shook their heads. We just want a healthy baby, Elena said. You choose whichever one you think looks best. Dr. Morrison smiled. I'll pick the one with the best morphology. You'll start estrogen and progesterone next week to prepare your lining, and we'll schedule the transfer for the week after that. The embryo transfer was nothing like the egg retrieval. Elena did not need anesthesia, just a full bladder that made the ultrasound clearer. Xander stood beside her, holding her hand while they watched on a screen as a tiny catheter delivered their embryo into Elena's uterus, a small white flash that Dr. Morrison pointed out with quiet satisfaction. And there you go, she said. You're officially pregnant until proven otherwise. Elena laughed at that, the sound slightly hysterical. That's one way to put it. Go home, rest for the remainder of today, and then resume normal activities tomorrow. No heavy lifting, no hot baths, no excessive exercise, but otherwise just live your life. We'll do a blood test in 10 days to check your HCG levels. 10 days had never felt so long. Elena threw herself into work, coordinating a series of corporate events that kept her busy, while Xander tried to focus on a major acquisition his company was pursuing. But both of them were distracted, counting down the days, wondering if this time, finally, it would work. The night before the blood test, Elena broke down. What if it's negative? She asked, sitting on the edge of their bed with her face in her hands. What if we went through all of that and it didn't work? Then we try again, Xander said, sitting beside her and pulling her against his side. We have 4 more embryos, Elena. This isn't our only chance. But what if none of them work? What if my body just can't stay pregnant? We don't know that. You're catastrophizing. I'm being realistic, she shot back, pulling away from him. I'm preparing myself for disappointment because that's all we've had for the past year. Disappointment after disappointment after disappointment. I know. And I know how hard this has been. But we have to have hope, Elena. Without hope, we've already lost. She looked at him with tired eyes. I don't know if I have any hope left. The words broke something in Xander's chest. He pulled her back into his arms, holding her while she cried, while she released all the fear and pain and exhaustion she had been carrying. When she finally quieted, he tipped her face up to look at him. Then let me hope for both of us, he said. Let me carry that for a while until you're ready to pick it back up. But don't give up, Elena. Please don't give up. She nodded, tears still streaming down her face, and let him hold her until they both fell asleep, exhausted by the weight of wanting something so badly. The blood test the next morning was routine. Elena was in and out of the lab in 15 minutes, and then they went home to wait for the call. Dr. Morrison had said they would have results by early afternoon. The call came at 1:30. Xander watched Elena's face as she answered, trying to read the outcome in her expression. Her hand came up to her mouth, and tears started falling, and Xander's heart dropped. It had not worked. They had failed again. But then Elena was laughing through her tears, nodding at something Dr. Morrison was saying, and Xander realized those were not tears of grief. Yes, Elena said. Yes, thank you so much. We'll see you next week. She hung up and turned to Xander, her face radiant despite the tears. It worked. My HCG is 68. I'm pregnant. Xander pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. You're pregnant, he repeated, the words not quite feeling real. We're having a baby. We're having a baby, she echoed, and they stood there in their kitchen, holding each other and crying happy tears for the first time in over a year. The following weeks were a careful dance between hope and fear. Elena went in for blood work every 2 days to make sure her HCG was rising appropriately. Each time the numbers came back strong, they allowed themselves to relax a little more. At 6 weeks, they went in for their first ultrasound, and Xander held his breath while Dr. Morrison moved the wand over Elena's abdomen, searching for the tiny flicker that would indicate a heartbeat. There, Dr. Morrison said, pointing to the screen. See that little flutter? That's the heartbeat. Xander stared at the screen, at the tiny blinking light that represented their child, and felt tears stream down his face. Elena was crying too, squeezing his hand so hard it hurt, and he did not care. Their baby had a heartbeat. They were really doing this. Everything looks perfect, Dr. Morrison said, taking measurements and printing out pictures. Congratulations, you two. I'll see you again in 2 weeks. They went out to dinner that night, to the same restaurant where Xander had proposed 2 years earlier. Elena was glowing, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach, and Xander could not stop looking at her, marveling at the fact that she was growing their child. I still can't believe it's real, Elena said, taking a sip of her sparkling water. She had given up wine the moment they had gotten the positive test, even though Dr. Morrison had said an occasional glass was fine. I keep waiting to wake up and find out it was a dream. It's real, Xander assured her. We saw the heartbeat. That was our baby. Our baby, she repeated, smiling. I love the sound of that. I love you, Xander said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Thank you for not giving up, for going through everything you went through to get us here. Thank you for going through it with me, Elena replied. I couldn't have done this without you." They told their families at 8 weeks, after another successful ultrasound confirmed that everything was progressing normally. Elena's parents cried and hugged them both, her mother already planning what dishes she would make when the baby arrived. Xander's parents were more reserved, but he saw the emotion in his father's eyes, the way his mother's hands trembled when she touched Elena's stomach. "We're so happy for you both," his mother said, her voice thick with unsaid words. Xander knew she had struggled with infertility herself before finally having him, and he saw recognition in her eyes, an understanding of what they had been through. Work became easier to focus on now that the heavy weight of infertility had lifted. Xander closed the acquisition deal he had been pursuing, adding 3 more luxury properties to his portfolio. Elena continued coordinating events, though she started turning down the larger, more physically demanding weddings as her pregnancy progressed. At 12 weeks, they graduated from Dr. Morrison's care to a regular obstetrician. It felt like a milestone, a recognition that they were now just like any other pregnant couple, no longer defined by infertility and treatment. Their new doctor, Dr. Sarah Walsh, was warm and reassuring, with 2 children of her own and a practice that had delivered thousands of babies. The second trimester brought relief from the nausea that had plagued Elena for the first few months, and she bloomed. Her skin glowed, her hair grew thick and shiny, and Xander thought she had never been more beautiful. They went shopping for baby furniture, picking out a crib and a changing table and a rocking chair for the nursery. Elena spent hours decorating the room, painting soft yellow walls and hanging curtains with tiny elephants. "We don't know if it's a boy or a girl yet," Xander reminded her, watching her arrange stuffed animals on a shelf. "Yellow is gender neutral," Elena replied, stepping back to admire her work. "And I figure we can add more specific decor once we find out." They had decided to wait until the anatomy scan at 20 weeks to learn the sex. The appointment felt momentous, both of them nervous as they sat in the waiting room. When they finally went back, Dr. Walsh spent nearly an hour examining every part of their baby, measuring the head and femur, checking the heart chambers and the spine, making sure every organ was developing correctly. "Everything looks great," she announced, finishing her measurements. "Would you like to know the sex?" Xander looked at Elena, who nodded eagerly. They had talked about doing a gender reveal party, but in the end, they decided they wanted to find out together, just the 2 of them. "Yes," Elena said. "We want to know." Dr. Walsh smiled and moved the wand to get a clear view. "It's a girl." "Congratulations." "A girl." Xander felt his eyes fill with tears again, imagining a daughter with Elena's dark hair and bright smile. Elena was crying too, laughing at the same time, and they held each other while Dr. Walsh discreetly left the room to give them a moment. "A daughter," Elena whispered. "We're having a daughter. She's going to be just like you," Xander said, kissing Elena's temple. "Beautiful and smart and strong. She's going to have you wrapped around her finger from day 1, Elena teased. "Without question," Xander agreed, and they both laughed. They spent the rest of the day celebrating, calling family and friends with the news, picking out pink accents for the nursery, debating names. Elena wanted something classic, while Xander gravitated toward more unique options. They finally settled on Rose Elena Montgomery, naming her after Elena's grandmother who had passed away the year before. "Rose," Elena said, testing the name out. "Little Rose." "Perfect," Xander agreed. The rest of the pregnancy passed in a blur of preparations. Xander attended childbirth classes with Elena, learning breathing techniques and labor positions, trying not to look too uncomfortable when the instructor demonstrated with a doll and a pelvis model. Elena's belly grew round and prominent, and Xander loved putting his hand on it, feeling Rose kick and squirm. "She's active," Dr. Walsh commented at one of the later appointments. "That's a good sign. Strong baby." At 36 weeks, Elena started having Braxton Hicks contractions that made Xander nervous every time. She assured him they were normal, just her body practicing for labor, but he kept his phone charged and close at all times, ready to rush her to the hospital at a moment's notice. The real contractions started at 39 weeks on a Tuesday morning. Elena woke him at 5, her hand on her stomach, breathing through a tightening. "I think this is it," she said, her voice a mixture of excitement and fear. "My water hasn't broken yet, but these feel different." Xander was out of bed immediately, helping her time contractions with the app they had downloaded. When they were consistently 5 minutes apart, he called Dr. Walsh, who told them to head to the hospital. The drive felt surreal, dawn breaking over the city as they made their way to the hospital where they would meet their daughter. Elena was quiet, focused inward, breathing through each contraction with practiced precision. Xander held her hand whenever he could, trying to project calm even though his heart was racing. Labor was long and difficult. The hours blurred together, Elena laboring in various positions, walking the halls, sitting on a birthing ball, enduring the pain with a strength that left Xander in awe. He stayed by her side through all of it, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, reminding her to breathe, telling her how strong she was, how proud he was of her. When Dr. Walsh finally said it was time to push, Elena was exhausted, her face pale and sweaty. But she bore down with everything she had, and after an hour of pushing, Rose Elena Montgomery entered the world with a lusty cry that made both of her parents burst into tears. "She's perfect," Dr. Walsh said, placing the squirming, pink baby on Elena's chest. "Congratulations." Xander stared at his daughter, at her tiny fingers and scrunched-up face, and felt his entire world realign. This was what they had fought for, what they had endured so much pain and disappointment to achieve. This perfect, beautiful little person who was half him and half Elena, a physical manifestation of their love. "Hi, Rose," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face as she touched their daughter's cheek. "We've been waiting for you." Rose quieted at the sound of her mother's voice, her eyes trying to focus, and Xander reached out to touch her tiny hand. She wrapped her fingers around his, her grip surprisingly strong, and he fell completely in love. The next few days in the hospital passed in a haze of feeding attempts, diaper changes, and visitors. Elena's parents brought homemade food and cooed over their granddaughter. Xander's parents visited with expensive gifts and soft expressions. Friends stopped by with flowers and balloons, eager to meet the baby everyone had been waiting for. But Xander's favorite moments were the quiet ones, late at night when it was just the three of them. He would hold Rose while Elena slept, staring down at his daughter in wonder, marveling at the fact that she was real, that she was theirs. Going home was both exciting and terrifying. Suddenly, they were alone with this tiny person who depended on them for everything. Elena threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, reading books and consulting with lactation specialists, and tracking every feeding and diaper change with meticulous precision. Xander did his best to support her, taking overnight duty when he could, changing diapers, doing laundry, keeping the house running while Elena focused on caring for Rose. He had rearranged his work schedule to be home more, delegating responsibilities to his management team so he could be present for these early weeks. "You're a natural," Elena said one night, watching him rock Rose to sleep. "I was worried you'd be one of those dads who doesn't really engage, but you're so hands-on." "Are you kidding? I've been waiting for this," Xander replied, looking down at his sleeping daughter. "I'm not missing a moment if I can help it. Rose was a good baby, all things considered. She slept in 3-hour stretches at night, nursed well, and had a sweet temperament that made even the difficult moments manageable." Watching Elena with her, seeing the fierce love in her eyes every time she looked at their daughter, Xander felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. 6 weeks postpartum, they went back to see Dr. Walsh for Elena's checkup. Everything looked good. Elena was healing well, and they were cleared to resume normal activities, including sex, though Elena laughed at that suggestion. "I'm still figuring out how to shower regularly," she said. "Sex is pretty low on the priority list right now." "No pressure," Xander assured her. "Whenever you're ready." But that night, after they had put Rose to bed, Elena came to him with a look in her eyes he had not seen in months. She kissed him slowly, deliberately, and led him to their bedroom. "Are you sure?" Xander asked, even as his body responded to her touch. "I'm sure," Elena said. "I need this. I need us." They made love slowly, carefully, relearning each other's bodies, reconnecting in the way that only they could. Afterward, lying tangled together in their bed with the baby monitor on the nightstand, Elena rested her head on Xander's chest. "You ever think about what we went through to get here?" she asked softly. "All the time," Xander admitted. "I think about how much it hurt, how scared we were. But I also think about how it brought us closer, how we learned to lean on each other in ways we never had to before." "I used to resent it," Elena confessed. "The infertility, the treatments, all of it. But now I'm almost grateful. It taught me how strong we are, how much we can survive together. And it makes me appreciate Rose even more, knowing how hard we fought for her." "She's worth it," Xander said, kissing the top of Elena's head. "Every needle, every disappointment, every tear, she's worth all of it." "She is," Elena agreed. "But so is this, us. Our marriage survived something that breaks a lot of couples, and we came out stronger on the other side. That's worth celebrating too." Xander tightened his arms around her, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. She was right. The struggle had strengthened their love in ways he could never have anticipated. They had learned to communicate more honestly, to support each other through the darkest moments, to find hope even when it seemed impossible. As Rose grew, her personality began to emerge. She was curious and alert, tracking faces with her dark eyes, smiling at her parents with gummy grins that melted Xander's heart every time. He loved coming home from work to find Elena playing with her on the floor, singing songs or reading board books, completely absorbed in their daughter. When Rose was 4 months old, Elena started talking about going back to work part-time. She loved being a mother, but she also missed the creative challenge of event planning, the satisfaction of pulling off a flawless wedding or corporate gala. "Are you sure?" Xander asked. "There's no financial pressure. You can take as much time as you want." "I know, and I'm grateful for that," Elena said. "But I think I'll be a better mother if I'm also doing something that fulfills me professionally. And we'll get a good nanny, someone I trust completely." They interviewed several candidates before finding Maria, a grandmother in her 50s with decades of childcare experience and references that sang her praises. Rose took to her immediately, and Elena felt comfortable leaving her daughter in Maria's care for the few hours a day she was working. Life settled into a new rhythm. Xander continued building his real estate empire, but he made sure to be home for dinner every night, to give Rose her bath, to read her bedtime stories. Elena coordinated events 2 or 3 days a week, slowly rebuilding her client base, while spending the rest of her time with Rose. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, Xander surprised Elena with a weekend getaway to Napa Valley. Elena's mother flew in to watch Rose, and they spent 2 days drinking wine, eating incredible food and reconnecting as a couple rather than just as parents. "This is perfect," Elena said, sitting on the balcony of their hotel room, watching the sun set over the vineyards. "Thank you for planning this." "You deserve it," Xander said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "You've been an incredible mother this year, but I wanted to remind you that you're also an incredible wife, and I love you for so many reasons beyond motherhood." Elena turned in his arms, tears shining in her eyes. "I love you too. More than I did 3 years ago, which I didn't think was possible." "The struggle strengthened our love," Xander said, echoing the conversation they had had months earlier. "And I wouldn't change that, even if I could go back and make it easier." "Neither would I," Elena agreed, and kissed him as the sun disappeared below the horizon. When Rose was 8 months old, Elena came to Xander with a thoughtful expression. "What would you think about trying for another baby?" she asked. Xander felt his stomach drop, memories of the struggle flooding back. "Are you sure? After everything we went through?" "I know it's a lot to consider," Elena said, "but we have 4 frozen embryos left. And I don't want Rose to be an only child if we can help it. I grew up with siblings, and I want that for her too." Xander took a deep breath, weighing his fear against his desire to give Rose a brother or sister. "Okay," he finally said, "but we do it on your timeline. No pressure, no rushing. When you're ready, we'll schedule the transfer." They waited until Rose was 10 months old before starting the process again. Elena began taking estrogen and progesterone, preparing her uterus for another embryo transfer. The medications brought back difficult memories, but this time they were tempered by the presence of Rose, a reminder that the struggle could have a beautiful ending. The transfer itself was easy, a familiar process now. They transferred one of their 2 male embryos and then settled in for the agonizing 2-week wait. This time, though, they were distracted by Rose, who was learning to pull herself up on furniture and babbling constantly. "Mama," she said one evening, and Elena burst into tears. She said, "Mama." Elena exclaimed, scooping Rose up and covering her face with kisses. "Did you hear that, Xander?" "She said, 'Mama,'" I heard, Xander said, grinning at the joy on his wife's face. "Though I'm a little offended that Dada wasn't her first word." "Your time will come," Elena assured him, still cuddling Rose close. The pregnancy test was positive again, but this time the joy was complicated by fear. What if this pregnancy did not go as smoothly? What if something went wrong? But as the weeks passed and the pregnancy progressed normally, those fears began to ease. Elena breezed through the first trimester with less nausea than before, and by the time they went in for the anatomy scan at 20 weeks, she had a prominent bump that Rose liked to pat and kiss. "It's a boy," Dr. Walsh announced, showing them the clear evidence on the screen. "A healthy baby boy." Xander and Elena looked at each other and smiled. A son. Rose would have a brother. They named him James Xander Montgomery, and he was born 2 weeks before his due date, during a quick labor that lasted only 6 hours. He had Xander's light brown hair and Elena's nose, and he cried less than Rose had as a newborn, content to eat and sleep and be cuddled. Rose was fascinated by her baby brother, wanting to touch him constantly, to bring him toys, to help with diaper changes. Elena's heart swelled watching her daughter transform into a big sister, and Xander marveled at the fact that they now had 2 children, a family of 4, when just 3 years ago, having even one child had seemed impossible. "We did it," Elena said one night, watching Xander rock James to sleep while Rose dozed on the couch beside her. "We survived infertility, and now we have 2 healthy, beautiful children." "We did," Xander agreed, looking at his son's peaceful face. And I know I said it before, but I'll say it again. The struggle strengthened our love. It taught us how to fight for what we want, how to support each other, how to find hope in the darkest moments, and I wouldn't trade that growth for anything." "Neither would I," Elena said. "It made us better partners, better parents. It taught us what we're capable of when we work together." Years passed in a blur of birthday parties and family vacations, of dance recitals and soccer games, of quiet mornings and chaotic evenings. Rose grew into a confident, intelligent girl with Elena's determination and Xander's charm. James was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a sense of humor that kept the whole family laughing. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander and Elena returned to the beach where he had proposed. They left the kids with Elena's parents and spent the day walking along the shore, holding hands, talking about everything and nothing. "You remember what you said when you proposed?" Elena asked, stopping to look out at the ocean. "I said a lot of things," Xander replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind, most of which were probably too sentimental to repeat. "You said that you couldn't imagine your life without me in it," Elena said, "that I made you want to be a better man." "I meant it," Xander said. "You still do. You know what's funny?" Elena leaned back against him. "When we were going through infertility, I thought that was the hardest thing we would ever face, but it was just the beginning. There have been so many challenges since then. Rose's broken arm, James's asthma, your father's heart attack, my mother's cancer scare. But we've handled all of it together the same way we handled infertility. As a team. That's the secret," Xander said. "We're stronger together than we are apart. Every challenge just proves that more." Elena turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I am so grateful that I married you, that we built this life together, that we fought for our family and won." "Me too," Xander said, kissing her softly. "I love you, Elena, more today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." "That's incredibly cheesy," Elena said, laughing through her tears. "I know, but it's true." They stood there on the beach, the same beach where their journey had truly begun, holding each other as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink. Behind them was a decade of love and struggle, of pain and triumph, of learning and growing together. Ahead of them stretched countless more years, full of challenges they could not yet imagine, but that they would face together as they always had, because the struggle had not broken them. It had strengthened their love, forged it into something unbreakable, something that could withstand anything life threw at them. And that was worth more than all of Xander's millions, more valuable than any asset or property or deal. Their love was the greatest investment he had ever made, and it had paid dividends beyond his wildest dreams. 2 beautiful children, a partnership that deepened with every passing year, and a future full of possibility. As they walked back to their car, hand in hand, Xander thought about the journey that had brought them here. The negative tests and failed treatments, the tears and the fear, the moments when giving up had seemed like the easier choice. But they had not given up. They had kept fighting, kept hoping, kept believing that they were meant to be parents together. And now they were. Not just parents, but partners in the truest sense of the word. People who had seen each other at their lowest and loved each other through it. People who had learned that love was not just about the good times, but about showing up for each other when things got hard. Rose and James would grow up knowing that they were deeply wanted, that their parents had fought for them, that their family was built on a foundation of love strong enough to weather any storm. And someday, when they faced their own challenges, they would have the example of their parents' marriage to guide them, showing them that struggle did not have to destroy love. It could strengthen it, if you were willing to do the work. "What are you thinking about?" Elena asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. "Just how lucky I am," Xander replied. "How grateful I am for everything we've been through, even the hard parts, because they brought us here." "To a beach at sunset," Elena teased. "To a life I never could have imagined," Xander corrected. "With a woman I love more than I knew was possible, and 2 kids who are the best parts of both of us. That's what the struggle gave us. That's what makes it worth it." Elena stopped walking and pulled him into a kiss, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude into it. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Let's go home," she said. "Our kids are probably driving my parents crazy and I want to tuck them in tonight." "Sounds perfect," Xander agreed. They drove back to Elena's parents' house, where they found Rose teaching her grandfather how to play a video game while James helped his grandmother bake cookies. The house smelled like vanilla and laughter, and when the kids saw their parents, they ran over with sticky hands and bright smiles. "Mama, Daddy, look what we made." Rose held up a misshapen cookie covered in too much frosting. "It's beautiful," Elena said, crouching down to admire it properly. "Did you save one for me?" "We saved 3, James announced proudly, "because you and Daddy and Rose all need one." "What about you?" Xander asked, ruffling his son's hair. "I already ate 2, James admitted with a sheepish grin. They stayed for dinner, eating Elena's mother's famous dumplings and listening to the kids chatter about their day. When it was time to go home, Rose held Xander's hand while Elena carried James, who was already falling asleep on her shoulder. "Today was a good day," Rose announced as Xander buckled her into her car seat. "The best," Xander agreed, kissing her forehead. At home, they went through the familiar bedtime routine. Baths and pajamas, teeth brushing and story time. Rose wanted to hear about the princess who saved herself, while James wanted stories about dragons. Elena read to Rose while Xander read to James, and then they switched, giving each child time with both parents. When the kids were finally asleep, Elena and Xander collapsed on the couch together, exhausted but content. 10 years, Elena said, her head on Xander's shoulder. "Can you believe it?" "Barely," Xander admitted. "Sometimes it feels like we just got married yesterday. Other times it feels like you've been part of my life forever." "Both can be true," Elena said. "That's the magic of it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together, appreciating the quiet after the chaos of the evening. Finally, Elena spoke again. "I never thanked you properly," she said softly. "For what? For not giving up. During the infertility, there were times when I wanted to quit. When I thought it would be easier to just accept that we might not have biological children. But you never let me stay in that dark place. You always pulled me back, reminded me why we were fighting. If it was not for you, we would not have Rose and James." "That's not true," Xander protested. "You're the strongest person I know, Elena. You would have found your way back to hope without me." "Maybe," Elena conceded, "but it would have taken longer, and it would have been lonelier. Having you beside me through all of it, that's what made it bearable. That's what gave me the strength to keep going." Xander pulled her closer, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. They had saved each other during those dark months. Neither of them could have survived it alone. But together they had not just survived. They had thrived. "We're a good team," he said simply. "The best," Elena agreed. Months turned into years, and their family continued to grow and change. Rose started middle school, suddenly too cool to hold her father's hand in public, but still willing to curl up next to him for movie nights. James discovered a love for building things, spending hours with Legos and model kits, creating elaborate structures that filled his bedroom. Xander's business continued to flourish. He opened a charitable foundation focused on affordable housing, inspired by Elena's passion for giving back. Elena expanded her event planning business, hiring a team and taking on higher-profile clients, including several A-list celebrity weddings. They faced challenges, of course. Rose went through a difficult phase where she pushed back against every rule, testing boundaries and their patience. James struggled with anxiety that required therapy and medication. Elena's father had a stroke that left him partially paralyzed, requiring months of rehabilitation. Xander's company faced a lawsuit from a disgruntled investor that took 2 years to resolve. But through all of it, they faced things together. They attended therapy sessions and medical appointments as a united front. They took turns being the strong one when the other needed to fall apart. They learned to ask for help when they needed it, leaning on friends and family and each other. On their 15th anniversary, their friends threw them a surprise party. The backyard was filled with people they loved, people who had supported them through everything. Elena's parents, fully recovered now, laughing with Xander's mother. Rose and James playing with their cousins, their faces flushed with happiness. Friends from work and college, people who had been there from the beginning. Speech. Someone called, and soon the whole crowd was chanting for Xander to say something. He looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly and stood up with his glass raised. 15 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the yard. I married the most incredible woman I have ever met. I thought I knew what love was. I thought I understood what marriage would be like. But I had no idea. The crowd laughed, and he smiled before continuing. The truth is, marriage is harder than I expected, but it is also more rewarding, more fulfilling, more transformative than I ever could have imagined. Elena and I have been through things that would have broken weaker couples. We have faced challenges that tested us in ways I did not know we could be tested. But every single time, we came out stronger on the other side. Because we chose each other, not just on our wedding day, but every day since then. He looked at Elena, seeing tears in her eyes, and felt his own eyes start to burn. They say that struggle builds character, and maybe that is true, but I think struggle also builds love if you let it. Every challenge we have faced together has deepened my love for this woman, has shown me new facets of her strength, her compassion, her resilience. So while I would not wish infertility or any of our other struggles on anyone, I also would not trade them because they made us who we are. They strengthened our love in ways that good times never could. He raised his glass higher. To Elena, the love of my life, my partner, my best friend, thank you for 15 incredible years. Here is to 50 more. Everyone cheered and drank, and Elena came to him, wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him while their friends whistled and their kids groaned in embarrassment. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I love you too, he whispered back. The party continued late into the night, full of laughter and dancing and joy. When it was finally over and the last guest had left, Xander and Elena stood in their backyard, surveying the aftermath of decorations and dishes. We will clean it up tomorrow, Elena decided, too tired to deal with it now. Agreed, Xander said, taking her hand and leading her inside. They checked on the kids, both fast asleep in their rooms, and then went to their own bedroom. As they got ready for bed, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of 15 years together, Xander thought about everything they had been through, everything they had survived and overcome, every moment of joy and pain that had brought them to this point. The infertility that had once felt like an insurmountable obstacle now seemed like just one chapter in their much larger story. An important chapter, certainly. One that had shaped them in fundamental ways, but not the defining chapter, because their love was bigger than that struggle. It had existed before it, and it had flourished after it, and it would continue to grow for decades to come. What are you thinking about? Elena asked, climbing into bed beside him. Just how glad I am that we never gave up, Xander said, pulling her close. On having a family on each other on us. Me too, Elena said, settling her head on his chest. Me too. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, content in the life they had built together. A life that had been worth every struggle, every tear, every moment of doubt. Because they had each other, and they had their family, and they had a love that had been strengthened by struggle into something unbreakable. Outside, the night was quiet and still. Inside, a family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved, that they were wanted, that they were home. And in the morning, they would wake up and do it all over again, facing whatever challenges came their way together, as they always had and always would. Because that was what love meant. Not the absence of struggle, but the willingness to face it together. Not the guarantee of easy times, but the promise to show up for each other when times got hard. Not perfection, but commitment. Not fairy tale endings, but real, messy, beautiful life. And for Xander and Elena Montgomery, that was more than enough. It was everything.